All right, guys, so today it seems that we're going to actually finally be able to move into our first argument, properly speaking, for God's existence. Now, there's many versions of what's called the cosmological argument. There's a version called the horizontal version, and there's a version called the vertical. And these different versions of this argument approach the question or approach the argument from a different perspective, from a slightly different angle. We're going to approach this argument today in the vertical sense of the word. Essentially, it goes like this. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe had a cause. Now, of course, there are some that want to deny that the universe has a cause to begin with, and some would even want to deny, obviously, the first premise that things that begin to exist have a cause. That things can pop into existence for whatever reason, for no reason at all. So, for instance, right now I may be sitting here and a tiger pop into existence and chew on my ear. Now, clearly, we can go into some of the more philosophical arguments for that, or in regards to that objection, rather. But for time purposes, and again, because this is more of an introductory segment into these talks, we're not going to go into the argument that things don't have a cause in any shape, form, or fashion. And remember, somebody may even say something or allude to someone like David Hume, the Scottish skeptic in the 1700s, that would try to argue that things don't have a cause. But again, even Hume didn't say things don't have a cause. Hume's argument was just that we have no reason or no justification to know what those causes in their relation to one another are. So we're not going to worry about the fact that things begin to exist without a cause at all. Again, nobody's worried that things pop into existence anywhere and nowhere for absolutely no reason at all. So with that first premise that the universe, or not the universe, that things have a cause, that things that begin to exist have a cause, we're going to bypass that objection. Again, we'll give you material to look into that further if you would like. Now, the second objection would, of course, be that the universe had a cause. And this is the key premise. First, let's note that most things, we won't even say everything yet at this point, but that most things at this point that we can observe are finite, they're contingent. Things that we look around, everything that we seem to be able to observe within the universe, we're not begging the question, we're not saying that this is in fact the case at this point, we're just saying that from what we observe within the universe, everything that we seem to observe, this camera, you, me, them, everybody, whoever, whatever, buildings, rocks, planets, satellites that orbit those planets such as the moon, that these things are finite, that they have depended upon something in order to exist. Now, if we were willing to say that everything that we observe has come into existence, then these things are dependent again upon something for their existence. Now, is this the fallacy of composition? So am I saying that because everything that we observe exists, therefore the universe itself had to come into existence? No, we're not even to that point yet. But what we do want to say is, even if we were trying to argue that everything that we see comes to existence, everything that we've observed comes into existence, therefore the universe would have had to have come into existence. Even if we wanted to argue that point, and someone were to lay the fallacy of composition at our feet, that, well, you're just saying that because everything that you observe comes to exist, the universe must have come to exist. You can't say that. That's like saying that every part of an elephant is light, therefore the entire elephant itself must be light. That would be a valid charge of the fallacy of composition. But what we're saying is not that. Let's say that we were arguing that. We would just simply say that no, it wouldn't be the fallacy of composition in the sense that if everything by its nature is finite or contingent, then the universe as a whole, its nature would be finite or contingent. For instance, if every tile on the floor is brown, well then the entire floor, if it's composed of those tiles, would have to be brown. You see how that would divert the fallacy of composition because it can't go against what its nature is. So if everything within the universe that we exist, everything that we observe is finite or contingent, at least at this point, the most reasonable thing to say would seem to be that the universe itself is finite or contingent, or that it had some cause. Now, we actually have reason to think that the universe did come into being. Right now, the most popular scientific theory aside from some of the others that are starting to rise to get over this, the popularity rather of this specific theory is the Big Bang Theory. Now the Big Bang Theory is not, contrary to what many theists or Christians may believe, that it contradicts the account in Genesis that the universe came into being. In fact, this is one of the best lines of evidence that we have that the universe did come into being. Why? Well, because it just simply says that the universe came to exist out of nothing, from nothing. Now, of course, we're not denying that there's an efficient cause. Of course, in the Christian perspective or the theistic perspective, that cause would be God. So we're not saying nothing in that sense, but we're saying nothing as in any material reality. None of that existed. So what are some of those lines of evidence? Well, first we have the second law of thermodynamics, which according to the first law is that, as you know, that energy can't be created nor destroyed once it's there. You can't introduce new energy. You can't get rid of energy. So the second law of thermodynamics just basically says that the amount of energy that we have, it being finite, is being used. It's being used up. So the energy that we have, and because that's being used up, there must have been at some point a beginning to this energy. Why? Because if the universe had been here from all eternity, an infinite amount of time had passed, we wouldn't have any more of this energy that would be able to be used. But here we are. The sun's shining, the wind's blowing. Clearly energy is being used in regards to these things that we notice around us. I'm talking, for instance. There's energy that's still being employed. All right, so let's give a practical example of this energy thing so that we know what we're talking about, so that we can hopefully make that more applicable to our discussion. Let's say that we have a generator that has a finite amount of gasoline or fuel, whatever the generator happens to be burning. This generator has a finite amount of that. Now, if I go outside and the generator is running, then what does that imply? Well, the implication is that it could not have been running for all eternity or for an infinite amount of time. Why? Well, because the generator wouldn't be running anymore. In fact, it would have stopped an infinite amount of time ago if it had been running for an infinite amount of time, because if there's only so much energy, so much gasoline that it can burn, then it would have stopped by this point. Yet the generator's still running. So we know that it can't have been running for all eternity or from an infinite past. Again, with the earth, with the universe itself, we see energy still being used. So in comparison to the generator, it has to have begun at some point. All right, so one of our second lines of evidence is that the universe is expanding. Remember that Einstein's theory, general theory of relativity, it called for basically a beginning of the universe. Now, even Einstein himself wasn't necessarily comfortable with that at the beginning. So he created what he ended up calling a fudge factor, where he divided by zero. And of course, we know you can't divide by zero because he wanted to avoid the implication that the universe would have had to have begun at some point in the finite past. Now, throughout experimentation and working with Einstein's theory, it seemed to be more the case that his theory was going to be possible. And remember, his theory at that point called for a beginning to time, space, and matter, saying that they were correlative, meaning that you couldn't have time without space, you couldn't have matter without time, and vice versa. All of these things, they were correlative. They couldn't be separated. If you had one, you had to have the other. They were working together. They were with one another in that sense. So you had Einstein's theory that was pointing to this. Now you had Edwin Hubble, who actually helped to verify this fact that the universe was expanding. Now, why is that significant at all, that the universe is expanding? Because remember, if you can look at the universe in reverse, if you can have it sort of as a video compilation, and you look at this and you back the universe in reverse, if you rewind it, if the universe is expanding, then the universe is going to have to contract to a point that's mathematically and logically nothing. Remember, so look at it this way. If you blow up a balloon and you tape like a button on the balloon, everything within the universe is moving away at each other at an equidistant rate from from everything else that exists, not in sporadic moments, but they seem to be expanding from a singular point. They're moving away from each other. So if you reverse that process, it comes back down to, again, a point that's mathematically and logically nothing there at all. Now, it's important to remember that when we look at documentaries on, say, popular TV channels, that they always will seem to show this Big Bang as if you're watching it and you see maybe some stars in the background or whatever, and then you see this Big Bang. But remember, there were no stars in the background. There was no space in the background. In fact, you couldn't even watch the Big Bang from the outside. Why? Because that presupposes that there was something to watch or from somewhere to watch. But there was no somewhere. There was no thing. Now, as laymen, it's hard for us sometimes to understand the word nothing, because we say, what are you doing today? I'm not doing anything. I'm doing nothing. Well, not literally, but we have to understand nothing in the literal sense. So how did Aristotle define nothing? Aristotle defined nothing as that which rocks dream about. Nothing. And what we have in the Big Bang is that the universe has come from no thing, nothing. Now, you've got some very intelligent men that are writing popular level works that are trying to redefine nothing. Well, nothing is positive and negative energy, or nothing is this quantum, vacuum with these fluctuations. But here's the problem: that's not nothing. If we're going to redefine our terms, well, then sure, of course, I can say that nothing existed before the universe, and then have all this other stuff that's existing if I want to redefine what nothing is. But that's not nothing. It's a metaphysical principle. Again, nothing is that which rocks dream about. When you reverse the fact that the universe is expanding, you're going to get mathematically and logically a point that is just no thing. There's nothing there. No thing. In fact, you can't even say before the universe happened, because again, that presupposes time. Again, one of the implications of a good scientific theory is that it's going to be able to predict phenomena that we should be able to either falsify or see as true in some capacity. One of these was what came to be known as the radiation afterglow. Now, without getting into all the technical aspects of that, what that essentially is that when something explodes, there are ramifications for explosions. Now, of course, over time, that starts to dissipate. The energy starts to dissipate. The heat starts to dissipate. The light starts to dissipate. And I'm using that in a very loose term, in a very loose way. But in the 60s, we had actually two scientists that found what would become known as the radiation afterglow. And this was essentially the ripple effect, the energy, the output from an explosion that would have been predicted to have been picked up in some sense. They were able to pick up this radiation afterglow, again, which just helped to verify that this thing did explode into being at one point. We've got plenty of lines of evidence that show that there's more reason, it's more plausible to think the second premise is true, that the universe began to exist, than it didn't. Now, having said that, let's get back more into the philosophical supporting leg of the second premise that the universe began to exist. I think that's more interesting just because that's my bias, obviously. But I think that hopefully you'll find that interesting as well. We can essentially boil this down to three logical categories. Because at the end of the day, either the universe is eternal or it's not eternal. Granted, I'm even throwing in that the multiverse theory works here. But again, remember, that doesn't solve that the universe is not eternal. It just moves the problem back again. Because you're going to have something that calls that, which something that calls that, something that calls that, unless you're willing to concede that the universe was created. So let's say that the multiverse theory goes back 40 billion universes. Well, what happened before that? You're either going to have to say that it was created, or you're going to have to say, well, something calls that, which calls that, which calls that. So with that said, we can boil this down into three logical categories. We can have a self-caused cause. We can have an infinite regress of causes, which would be something like the multiverse theory, at least at this point. Or we can have an uncaused cause. Now, it's important to remember, any answer that can be given is going to fall in one of those categories, whether it be multiverse theory, whether it's going to be the cosmic rebound theory, the theory that says that the universe is expanding and contracting, expanding and contracting. It's going to fall in one of those, self-caused cause, infinite regress of causes, or an uncaused cause. Now let's look at the problems with these options. Either the universe is eternal or it's not eternal. All right, well, let's say that the universe somehow caused itself to come into existence. That would fall into the category of what? Yeah, self-caused cause. Now what's the problem with a self-caused cause? Well, the problem with that is that in order for something to cause itself to exist, it's going to have to exist in some shape, form, or fashion in order to cause itself to exist. But if it already exists in order to cause itself to exist, then it can't cause itself to exist because it already exists. We see how that's just logically absurd. It's just stupid. Don't say junk like that. All right, so the second point is this: an infinite regress of causes. Well, what's wrong with saying that something caused something, which something caused something, which something caused something? Well, the problem is this: you can't have an actual infinite in regards to anything. Why? Let's pretend like that right here there's a table and I want to throw an actual infinite number of hats on this table. And I throw a hat, and then I throw a hat, and then I throw a hat, and I throw a hat, and I throw a hat. Well, what am I going to have to keep doing? In order to be an infinite amount of hats, when I get to the last hat, what am I going to have to do? I'm going to have to throw another hat. I'm going to have to throw down another hat. I'm going to have to throw down another hat. If I go to the library over here across the quad and I try to touch an infinite amount of books, I can't do it. I'm going to get to the last one in the series, but of course, if it's the last one, then it's not what? Infinite. Because infinite always can be added, you can always add one more to an infinite set. Well, I'm going to have to touch another one, to touch another one, touch another one. You can't do that. Look at it this way. An Islamic scholar, hundreds of years ago, came up with an argument that's philosophical in nature that tries to show this point as well. He says that, look, in an actual infinite, you can't have a number. You can't have an ending day if the universe is infinite in duration. But today is the last day of history. Now here's the problem. If we can't come to an ending point, well then you also can't go back to an ending point. So for instance, imagine a set of dominoes. And let's say there's an infinite set of dominoes. And in order for this last one to fall, the one in front of it has to fall, right? But the one in front of that one has to fall. But the one in front of that one has to fall. Well, we go all the way back to the first domino. Well, what in front of that causes that one to fall? If it's an infinite amount, well, one in front of that, well, one in front of that. But if there's an infinite amount, you can never get back to the first domino that causes the series to start. Why? Because you'd have to go back to another. But if you go back to that one, you'd have to go back to another, to another. So you would never even get the process started if there were an infinite amount of days, and in our example, an infinite amount of dominoes to get the thing going. So again, there had to have been a beginning to that point. You can't have an infinite regress. So a self-caused cause is out because it's logically absurd. Again, because you have to exist in order to cause yourself to exist, but if you already exist, you can't cause yourself to exist because you exist. Infinite regress can't even get anything going. You can't have it to actually even happen. And then so the last possible option that we have in those three logical categories would be an uncaused cause. Well, now if you have an uncaused cause, is that illogical? No, there's nothing illogical about saying that there's an uncaused cause, just as there's nothing illogical about saying there's an infinite regress. The problem with an infinite regress is you just can't have it actually happen. It's not logically impossible, it's just actually impossible. So again, an uncaused cause, there's nothing illogical about that. Why? Because the buck has to stop somewhere in order to get anything happening. To get anything going, the buck has to stop. Why does it have to stop? Infinite regress won't work. Self-caused cause won't work. The only option left is an uncaused cause. Now, what would an uncaused cause be? It would have to be something that's eternal. Well, again, the problem, well, wait a minute, we can't say that something is eternal. Well, those are your only options. Either the universe is eternal, in the sense with all its causes that keep going, or you've got this uncaused cause that's eternal. You have to have one of these. Those are the only options you have. And in light of the other two won't work, you have this uncaused cause that's left. Now, what is the best terminology that we could give this uncaused cause if it created time, if it created space, if it created matter? Because remember, the Big Bang Theory shows that time, space, and matter came into existence. But if this created time, and it created matter, and it created space, then it can't be bound by time, it can't be bound by space, it can't be bound by matter, so this uncaused cause would have to be what? Well, the best word that we could come up for that would be God. All right, very quickly, let's say that that argument that we just gave completely is just wrong. It just doesn't work at all. Why? Let's say that tomorrow on CNN, it comes out that the universe is eternal. No doubt. Now, again, there's just so much compelling evidence, whether it be philosophical, whatever it may be, that it's not. Let's just say that that happens. Let's just concede that the universe is eternal. Well, now is the problem solved, that we don't need God in the picture? Well, bad news according to which side of the aisle that you're on. Because Aquinas, via Aristotle, has come up with an argument, in fact, many arguments, 5 at least, but the first is his argument from the unmoved mover. Now, we're not saying moved in the sense of what we mean by that now. We mean change. We mean from potentiality to actuality. Aquinas says, okay, I'll give you that the universe is completely eternal. It's been around for eternity. All this infinite stuff, have at it. But you still have the problem of moving something from pure potentiality to actuality. And if there are things that are moving from potentiality to a state of actuality, that can't go in infinite regress. Not in the sense of what we said a minute ago to get things started, but you would have to have something that's moving potentiality to actuality. He'll concede you, or he'll give you rather, the eternity of the universe, but you've still got a 1,000-year-old argument, actually 2,000 if you want to consider Aristotle's version. You've got at least a 1,000-year-old argument waiting in the wings that will concede that the universe is eternal. And in fact, I think that's a more compelling argument. I think it's even a stronger argument because it's metaphysical and it doesn't depend on any scientific theory per se. But we won't necessarily go into that. Again, we'll give you information or books and the bibliography that can guide you down that path or go on that trajectory if you so desire. I think it's a stronger argument. Okay, with everything that we've laid on the table at this point, it's a lot of information. So let's just do a quick recap. The syllogism is a deductive syllogism, meaning that the premises are true, that the conclusion necessarily follows. So that everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause for its existence. Again, deductive syllogism follows like the night follows the day. It has to. We've given good reason to think that those premises are true, that everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. We've given lots of information to think that the universe began to exist. So, if the universe began to exist, the universe had to have a cause for its existence. Now, to recap that, this cause for its existence, that cause can only fall into one of 3 logical categories. Either an infinite regressive causes, a self-caused cause, or an uncaused cause. We've given reason to think that the self-caused category just won't work. The infinite regress won't work. It only leaves us with an uncaused cause. Now, we can infer from that if time, space, and matter came into existence, then this uncaused cause can't be bound by time, space, and matter. So if it's not bound by time, it has to be 1, timeless. If it's not bound by matter, it has to be immaterial. If it's not bound by space, it has to be infinite. So just from inference to the best explanation of what this uncaused cause would have to entail, some attributes. It would have to be infinite, have to be timeless, and it would have to be all-powerful in order to bring all power that we see into existence. That's at least good reason to push us on the path that maybe God exists.